Welcome to Sunday School at Cedar Lane United Methodist Church. Our lesson today comes from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37, verses 21 through 28. The amazing thing is what we know of Ezekiel and his ministry is found in the book that bears his name. The NIV Study Bible notes give a good summary of the book as a whole, background information about Ezekiel, and the dates of his ministry. The book of Ezekiel has more dates than any other prophetic book. And I want to show you a chart that has been converted, if I can do this, hang on. If you look at this, I don't know how much you can see from there, but the reference in first chapter, first verse is July 31st, 593 BC. And as you follow down the list, you see so many of those dates have actual days beside them. You know, we're doing good most of the time to get a year and maybe a month. But for Ezekiel, for some reason, we have all of these very specific dates. Let's go back to our Zoom here. Now, I showed you that, but I don't want to get too far into the weeds. But there are some dates that we need to be aware of. In 605 BC, some from Judah were taken into exile. This group included Daniel and his friends. So that's 605 BC. In 597 BC, the king's son, Jehoiachin, and 10,000 others, including Ezekiel, were taken into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar. And then in 586 BC, the walls of Jerusalem were breached, the city plundered, and the temple burned. From these dates, we see that Ezekiel was in Babylon for 11 years before Jerusalem was destroyed. From when the first Jews were taken into captivity to Jerusalem's destruction was only 20 years. Can you imagine watching your nation disappear and not being able to do anything about it? Such a short time with so much upheaval. Think about what you were doing 20 years ago. Look at the changes that the world has undergone since 2003. That's 20 years. Cell phones began to come with cameras in 2002. Wow. Think about all the other changes. I can say with some certainty that all of us have gotten older. Ezekiel was from a priestly family and eligible to serve as a priest. There was no temple in which to minister, but he could minister to the people. And he did that by the river Kibar, which is where he saw his first vision. Here's a quote I'd like to share from the NIV. More than any other prophet, more even than Hosea and Jeremiah, he was directed to involve himself personally in the divine word by acting it out in prophetic symbolism. Here's an example of one thing. We'll see another one in a short time. When his wife died, which was around the time of Jerusalem's destruction, he was told by God not to mourn her openly, as an example to Israel not to mourn openly the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. So this is acting out what he's being told to do and showing them. There's some additional information concerning Ezekiel's message that I would like to read from the NIV study Bible, if you will indulge me. The contours and sweep of Ezekiel's message are similar to other prophets, but he focuses uniquely on Israel as the holy people of the holy temple, the holy city, and the holy land. By defiling her worship, Israel had rendered herself unclean and had defiled the temple, city, and land. From such defilement, God could only withdraw and judge his people with national destruction. But God's faithfulness to his covenant and his desire to save were so great that he would revive his people once more, shepherd them with compassion, cleanse them of all their defilement, reconstitute them as a perfect expression of his kingdom under the hand of David, overwhelm all the forces and powers arrayed against them, display his glory among the nations, and restore the glory of his presence to the holy city. That was from the NIV study Bible, if you want to look it up. For Ezekiel, Israel's sin didn't just corrupt the people. It affected everything and defiled everything. The temple, the city, even the very land itself. We know that God is a holy God, so he removed himself from the corruption just as he said he would and allowed judgment to come. But there is hope, his promise of renewal. As I was preparing this lesson, a modern day example of how sin corrupts presented itself. I ran an antivirus program on my computer, just as a matter of course, and found a suspect file. I spent over an hour trying to figure out what it was, what threat it posed, and trying to get it off my computer, or at least get it quarantined where it couldn't hurt. The file exploits a vulnerability that would allow someone to uninstall or disable my antivirus and infect the rest of the computer. As we've all heard in the news, ransomware can make a computer system totally useless. You can't get it back until you pay the hacker for a key. That's where Israel was in their relationship with God. Useless. God had to choose between blowing everything up and starting again, or pay the price for the key that would unlock his relationship with Israel and indeed all mankind. Remember those dates I mentioned? 605, the first exiles, 597, Ezekiel, and 10,000 others. 586, the destruction of Jerusalem. It's just a reminder there's not going to be a test at the end. We're going to read from Ezekiel 37, starting at verse 15. I think that will help us with the background to what we're actually studying today. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, take a stick of wood and write on it, belonging to Judah and the Israelites associated with him. Then take another stick of wood and write on it, belonging to Joseph, that is, to Ephraim, all the Israelites associated with him. Join them together into one stick, so that they will become one in your hand. When your people ask, won't you tell us what you mean by this? Say to them, This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am going to take the stick of Joseph, which is in Ephraim's hand, and the Israelite tribes associated with him, to join it to Judah's stick. I will make them into a single stick of wood, and they will become one in my hand. Hold before their eyes the sticks you have written on, and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will take the Israelites out of the nations where they have gone. I will gather them from all around and bring them back into their own land. I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. There will be one king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms. They will no longer defile themselves with their idols and vile images, or with any of their offenses, for I will save them from all their sinful backsliding, and I will cleanse them. They will be my people, and I will be their God. My servant David will be king over them, and they will all have one shepherd. They will follow my laws and be careful to keep my decrees. They will live in the land I gave to my servant Jacob, the land where your ancestors lived. They and their children and their children's children will live there forever. And David, my servant, will be their prince forever. I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it will be an everlasting covenant. I will establish them and increase their numbers, and I will put my sanctuary among them forever. My dwelling place will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Then the nations will know that I, the Lord, make Israel holy, when my sanctuary is among them forever. I'd kind of like to divide these into two sections. Basically what I saw. The first being Ezekiel 37:15 through 23, which talks about restoration. The second, from verse 24 through 28, describes their walk with God when they return home and after they are restored. The diaspora, everybody says it a little different, but I think that's the pronunciation. The diaspora scattered the Jews among all the nations of the known world at that time, and that includes the nations in Africa. For restoration to begin, they would physically have to be brought back together. That is what Ezekiel was demonstrating by the two sticks he was told to hold as one. Judah and Benjamin were one stick, and Joseph, Ephraim is the other word. Ephraim was one of Joseph's sons, the other. Over time, both the names Ephraim and Israel had come to refer to the 10 tribes of Israel that separated themselves from Judah and Benjamin. Solomon died, and his son Rehoboam became king, and he listened to some very bad advice and lost the kingdom. The 10 tribes revolted and separated themselves from the nation. But God was going to bring them back and make them one nation after 350 years of division. They would live in the land God had promised to Abraham, the land of their ancestors with one king over them, all of them. Our author points out that the monarchy was never reestablished. They were just given governors to rule over them. Ezekiel's prophecy of one king has been interpreted as looking forward to the Messiah, whose rule encompasses all things. That's the way he put it. Not only would it be the end of separation of God's people, it would be the end of their idolatry. They would stop defiling themselves by worshiping false gods. They, like us, could not do it on their own willpower. It was God who saved them from their own self-destruction. It is God who cleansed them. Then God promised in 23c, they will be my people and I will be their God. Try to imagine sitting in Babylon and how this message rang in the ears of those people. They were not lost forever. There was hope. That word hope seems to be cropping up a lot in these lessons. The parallels to modern life without God seem obvious. Ephesians 1:12 says, remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from the citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. Without Jesus, our lives are also hopeless. We do not have the power to change ourselves. God provided Jesus to take away our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Jesus paid the price to unlock our lives from sin's control. That does not mean that we never sin again. We are, after all, frail humans who choose to follow Jesus. We overcome a sinful nature by the power of the Holy Spirit. We have been adopted as God's children and will never be separated from our Father again. What was the vision of what life would look like when Israel was restored to the land? The word that comes to mind for me is stable, stability. I don't know about you, but I like things stable. The New Testament talks about living a quiet and peaceful life, just so you could spread the gospel instead of having all of this stuff. One person, a good shepherd in charge, King David. Does this mean that God is going to raise David from the dead after 400 years? No, I don't think so. I agree with our author that it would be someone like David who would follow God with his whole heart. This same analogy follows through with John the Baptist and Elijah. John the Baptist ministered in the power and spirit of Elijah. Wasn't Elijah, but that's how he ministered. A part of the stability the people would experience would come from doing what God's word asked them to do. As followers of Christ, James 1:22 tells us to do the same thing. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. The effect of this stability and being obedient to God was that the people, their children, and their grandchildren would live in their homeland, the place that God gave Jacob, until the end of the age. Our author points out that that's what the meaning of forever is in the Hebrew, the end of the age. They would prosper, and there would be population growth. They would experience God's peace and his abiding presence among them. And the temple, having been rebuilt and showing God's presence, would be an outward sign of his presence with them. God gets all the glory from this. The nations will see that God is with Israel. They will know that it is God who makes Israel holy. It is Jesus who gives us his righteousness when we accept his sacrifice on the cross. It's Jesus who grants us his peace and brings hope to our lives each day. Thank you for being with us today. We hope you have a wonderful week and hope to see you then.